Hello, it's me on the internet again. Final show of the year. We are, this is kind of like Christmas plus New Year's themed. So I don't know how, holidays themes doesn't really matter, but let's get to it. We're going to talk today about everything Docker. I've got a wonderful crew of people here with me today, and I'm realizing that we're going to have to go through so much stuff that it's going to be hard to contain all this in a reasonable timeline. We don't have 24 hours of live streaming to do all this. So thanks for being here. Let's get to it. Hi, Nirmal.
Hello.
My co-host is back. Nirmal Mehta from AWS. I mean, you don't live in AWS. You're not. That's not a place. But
I live in my home.
You don't live in the cloud, literally.
At least not yet. Maybe in the future. So good to see you. Happy holidays. Happy almost New Year's.
Almost. We've got a couple more days. And then I'm going to keep the whole next year a secret about what we're all going to be doing. So you're just going to have to keep coming back, people. Keep coming back to find out what the plan is. We're going to have a ton of shows next year that we already are planning. We got people from KubeCon, all the projects. It's a long list. And Nirmal and I got to get to work.
I was just going to say, I'll be there. So
you will.
That's not
you
a
will
secret.
also be there.
Yes.
That is not. So let's run through the details, people. In case you're not familiar with this show or the format, this turns into a podcast. And you can hear Nirmal and I in your ears. Instead of watching us on the internet, you can listen to us. That's over at podcast.bretfisher.com. All the links are below in the description. Yeah. And you can just look at all this stuff. We've done a lot this year, you and me.
Yes. Lots of good shows.
We both hang out in the Discord server, so you jump into that right above us. We got that. We snuck that URL in, the discord.gg/devops. That's a pretty dope Discord URL. We are now the DevOps on Discord. It's official. There's many DevOps, but this one is mine, and we all hang out in there. So come join us between shows, during the show. We're in here chatting. This is 16,000 people all learning DevOps, using DevOps day to day. We got monthly meetups in here. We got swarm meetups in here. There's a ton going on. I can't keep up, as you can see by all of my channels that I can't keep up with. Yeah. All right. And then we have the newsletter. So you want to find out when Nirmal's going to be back on the show, what guests are going to be on the show. We just sent out this week's letting you know yesterday or the day before that, hey, come join us. We're going to have Michael Irwin from Docker on the show. So that's how you find out. Go to Bret.news, sign up for free. You get one email a week. And it's just what we're releasing. It's basically me announcing what Nirmal's doing with me this week and who we're going to have on the show. And then we have a loot box full of swag, mostly T-shirts, but we have coffee mugs, which I don't have in front of me because I'm a horrible product placement person. But you can join our loot crew, and sometimes there's sales on there. You can jump in and find out when there's sales. We'll let you know if you come back every week if there's a sale on that stuff. So enough of the details. Did I cover everything, Nirmal?
Yes, you
did.
did. You're good. Okay. You're good.
Okay.
We have so much stuff to cover. We got to get right into it. So who's
none
on
of
the
that
show?
matters. Yeah, none of that matters.
There he is.
All right. In case you don't know Michael Irwin, he has been on this show approximately one less time than Nirmal, I think. He's a repeated guest multiple times a year. We all live hours from each other, but we all never see each other unless we go to a conference. This is the tech life, right? We could be a reality show. Yep. Well, welcome, Michael.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
You're welcome. I'm glad to be here. I'm on the Michael and Nirmal show. So
that's right.
That's what we're doing here.
Yeah, just your name's all over the place. So we just let you.
I kind of made it obvious so that no one would mistake. Are you confused about what you're watching right now? It's not the Nirmal show, unfortunately. It's the Bret show. So that's why you all are here, is to bring me down a notch. Just like, let's have a little bit less Bret, a little bit more other people.
That's right.
Well, we're going to talk about Docker all for this next hour, and we've got a lot to get through. So for those watching, like the gist of the year is Docker released a ton of stuff. The TLDR is a ton of stuff across all their product lines, everything from Hub to Docker Desktop to Engine to Compose to new things, AI. Like, we've got a bunch we're going to get through. I have talked about this for y'all on the internet multiple times this year. We had DockerCon where we all got to see each other finally in LA. That was the big news of the fall. Was we got and we had multiple days of product releases, which it was kind of nice because we all go to KubeCon and other Linux conferences and stuff, and there's not usually product releases on stage because it's all open source usually. So you don't really need to make announcements. And so it's kind of nice to go to a conference where there's, what's today's announcement? What's the new tool I get to download today or jump into a waiting list for a trial?
Yeah, well, I will say from the inside, the conference-driven development is stressful as all get out.
Preach. As someone who's still 4 weeks after recovering from AWS reInvent.
Oh yes,
preach.
Yep.
Yeah. We're by the way, we're all in chat. Eric Smalling, another high fiver and friend of the show. he's moving on to a new job, so we're gonna have to look out and see what's gonna happen for Eric next. So congrats for that. And Caesar's here as a regular. Alexandra's here. Mitchell's here. Pseudo B Mitch. What's up? Ooh. Another captain. Yeah. It's funny because in the chat we see all these wrenches because these are people that have mod rights. And so, like, if you've been on this show or you're a friend of mine or whatever, I give you mod rights so that we can all look out for each other in chat, keeping the spammers out. And it's funny because it just looks like a bunch of mods hanging out in chat. We don't really have an audience other than just the people that are friends of the show. Yeah. Anyway, let's get to it.
Let's do it.
Nirmal, I don't really have an order for this. Should we just go top down? I mean, look at this stuff.
Let's do it.
We can't see it yet, but there we go.
Look at this ridiculous list.
A lot of things to cover. So let's just start at the top.
I mean, this is like, this is honestly half, because we had to, like, all the other little things. We just said, well, we're not going to get to it.
Yep.
So let's start with the core, right? The Docker engine. That's probably the best place to start because there was a lot of activity there. That was not typical of previous years, but give us the rundown, the TLDR, I guess, or TLDW on the Docker engine this past in 2023.
Yeah, so as you see there, Brett's got pulled up here, the Docker Engine 24.0 release notes, and 24 was a big release. And if you scroll down just a little bit to like the 24.0.0, I mean, you just see the list.
New.
I mean, even just the list, like there's a ton of stuff that was included in this release. So, and a lot of stuff that people have been kind of anxiously waiting for a little while and whatnot. So it's, in many ways, I also see it as a good sign. You know, when Docker has kind of gone through this rebirth in many ways, it took a while to ramp things back up and to get all the processes and the people and the open source and everything moving again and streamlined. And so again, that's partly why it took a while. But hey, now it's out there, and since then there's been several patch releases, and so yeah, the gears are moving and releases are happening, and lots of good stuff in there. Won't go through all of it here, but it's nice to see the improvements around build kits and which helps enable a lot of the other things that we're doing around SBOMs and that kind of stuff too. But again, just a lot of good stuff in the core here, and again, it's further showing our commitment to continuing to support the open source projects here and continue to help out the ecosystem. So.
Yeah, you do. I mean, obviously the commercial products get a lot of the press. They're flashy. There's GUIs. There's websites, and we all came into this game when all we had was Docker Engine and Docker CLI, and if you look at the version releases, like we had a version released in 2019, we had a version released in 2020, and then it was 3 years before we got the next one. And now we're on this rapid clip of we've had 2 major versions in a year, in less than a year. And to me, the one thing that I remember from both of these releases is the build kit and BuildX and build kit are updated, and now the default builder for every installation case on every system, not just Docker Desktop. For a lot of us, for years we're putting Docker build kit as an environment variable. I'm going to zoom in on that. And we don't have to do that anymore, even on a Linux builder. And I just today or tomorrow will release a podcast about Dockerfile front ends, which you all should listen to because there's no video on it. It's just a podcast. And it talks all about these front ends that are essentially powered by this change. Because now that we have BuildKit as the default builder, everyone can use these new fancy front end features that are essentially Dockerfile versions. So I did a whole 15-minute rant about that last night on a podcast release. So
yes.
So yeah, Docker Engine, yay! Woo. Okay, that's the first checkbox. First checkbox. All right, now there's a ton of stuff in here. We just lumped around Docker Desktop updates.
Yes.
So I tried to break it out a little bit to Docker Desktop itself and things that only are in Docker Desktop, and then Docker tooling like maybe Compose or CLIs that maybe you could get elsewhere. Michael, tell us a little bit about these performance improvements. We were hearing a lot about that.
This year the team really doubled down and probably more than doubled, tripled, quadrupled, whatever. It was a big effort internally of like, how do we just make it faster? Because we were seeing and hearing from a lot of folks that just, hey, we need better speed improvements, or it takes so many resources to run, and that's what. And while there was some truth to it, there in many aspects they were blown out of proportion compared to what they should have been at times. But hey, the best way to help that out is just to say, hey, we're gonna make performance better anyways. And so again, really just drilled down into that and like how can we make performance better? So startup times on my Mac, I can go from Docker Desktop not running to a container running within 2 seconds now, which is unheard of from even a year ago. Some of the other numbers that were on the screen there, about 450% improvement in network speeds. And that's a lot of going from the host into the container or vice versa. So if you're copying files or sharing files, and that also helps speed up a lot of the build time improvements and whatnot. There were Rosetta work for those running on Mac that went in GA this year as well. So again, a lot better emulation if you still have to run AMD 64 binaries and images and whatnot. And this last one is actually a pretty cool one. It's a resource saver mode. When Docker Desktop, when you're not running any containers or doing any work there, the virtual machine that Docker is using will just shut down and will just kill it off for you. And so you're getting back all that CPU and battery and everything. And then the next time you run a container, that'll start the VM back up. And again, because of the speed improvements, which we've been putting into it, that VM starts up really quickly now too. Yeah. So again, lots of improvements. It's been awesome.
Yeah. Performance always matters.
Yep.
And as much as we are getting bigger and beefier machines all the time, it's just, it just matters all the time. Yes. Right. And I think you've probably seen this with all the folks that we interact with, the community and customers and folks just getting started. The immediate performance of that tool is like the main takeaway, right? It's that first impression, it's the lasting impression. And when you're using it daily, it's like having a sharp knife, right? You want to make sure that like a chef wants to have a sharp knife. It just matters all the time.
and for me too, it's also been nice to actually like look at my Mac and okay, what apps are using the most power? What's draining my battery the most? And like, I haven't seen Docker Desktop on that list in quite a long time now, which is awesome.
Yeah, that is great. That's a good feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do like the multiple, like there's a manual option for putting it to sleep. There's this automatic resource saver option. I now feel like I've got more control over pausing it and all that stuff. And it's nice. Like if those of you out there, if you haven't realized, like the command line will automatically wake it up. There's certain tricks up their sleeve. And the captains have been giving feedback around this because we're all, not only are we just running it daily for work, but we're all constantly playing with new features, trying to figure things out. And, as we click all the boxes, enable all the things, it could get a little hairy for how much resources Docker's running, especially if you have a whole bunch of extensions, which we were going to get to because the extensions came out last year, right? 2022 was the year of extensions. Yeah. Yep. And I feel like 2023 was the year of extensions really coming into their own as sort of this de facto. Now everyone else is copying Docker Desktop's extensions idea. A lot of the other container tooling is jumping on that bandwagon, and it's a great idea. I always point out that a year and a half ago, when Docker first came to the captains and said, "Hey, we're thinking of this idea. We're calling it extensions. It's little programs inside Docker Desktop, maybe in the GUI, and they run in a container. And what do you think? What ideas do you have?" And I think the captains came up with like 2 or 3, and we're kind of struggling to figure out what would I want to run in Docker that I can't already in a container, and then suddenly the marketplace just blew up. Within the first 6 months of all these great ideas. I didn't know I needed OpenShift. I didn't know I needed Portainer with a one-click install, but I do, and they're all there now. Yep. So we've got a couple actually to talk about here in a minute, if I can shut up. All right, we have lots of dashboard updates. You mentioned that. Do we want to just show a real quick screen for those that are maybe not updating their Docker and not aware that the GUI itself is actually getting much more advanced in terms of like showing resources and all the buttons. And we didn't actually test your shared screen, did we?
No, but here I'll bring it up and we'll just do it live, right?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, what could go
YOLO?
wrong?
What YOLO? That's right.
There it is.
Hooray! So yeah, this is Docker Desktop. The main container screen didn't get a ton of updates. Some of the layouts and that kind of stuff, maybe some small ones, but there's some additional charts up here to be able to see CPU and memory usage and whatnot. I can also drill into a specific container. So this is the example voting app that I think many of us use quite often. But if I open this up, I can see stats about this specific container. You can see that it's got some history, even though I just opened it up as well. So it's automatically aggregating that for me. There's some new features around being able to see a file navigator. So I can just actually open this up and navigate through the files that are in here. And so I don't have to, if I'm not as comfortable with the CLI or navigating through, I can do that here as well. I can also just double click even on a file I can make changes to files directly in here as well too. Of course, it's still, it's not a full IDE or anything of that sort, but if you need to make just quick changes or navigate around, and you see that it even tells me what are mount points or what files have been modified, that kind of stuff. So again, just some kind of quality of life improvements there. Some other things with the dashboard, the quick search here up at the top. So if I'm just getting started, say I want to run a Jupyter notebook, I could just search Jupyter, and this is give me all the sponsored open source projects, and I can just click on run, and it will download and get it going and everything too. So again, and I can actually even click on the image itself, and it'll actually pull up the Docker Hub stuff. This one is saying that I should use the Quay image, but anyways, it's again giving me details. I don't have to leave Docker Desktop and go searching on Hub and whatnot, but get all that right here. It'll search docs and extensions, volumes, containers. Quite a few different things there as well too. So, yeah, lots of like small improvements to the dashboard, to the UI. Again, as Docker becomes more of a commodity, more utility that more folks are using, it's starting to be used by folks that aren't as comfortable in the CLI and other other types of developers. So the more that we can continue to build this out, and click operations is a very valid way of doing things too. So
as much as us command line junkies think that that's the only way like people interact with computing worlds, you're right. Like there's lots of folks that use user interfaces and GUIs, and those performance improvements on top of the improvements in the UI in combination open access to Docker for lots more folks, right? So folks that are running on older hardware where those resources are more constrained. Plus those are then also going to be typically the folks that might be using the GUI tools or more on their older hardware, and so it becomes more accessible, which is awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it just makes me think. Okay, can I teach Docker without ever touching the CLI?
We're not quite there yet. We're still working on it. So there are some things that you still have to do with the CLI. Like I can't do a build through the GUI yet. So you still have to use a Docker build command. Right. So there's like I can't spin up a compose project unless it was stopped. I can press play to continue. So
right.
There's still a couple things you can't do through the GUI.
There's not like file open, compose file, project launch. Yeah, it doesn't have that workflow yet. But
not yet. No.
Yeah, and so that's the thing, right? We keep adding more features to the GUI, but we also want it to be super fast. So like, there's always that balancing act, and that's the struggle for it. All right, do we have any other major things? I love the build view, but we're going to get to that in a minute. Like, I love the idea of expanding on that. We also are going to talk about some extensions, including the debug extension in a little bit. Anything else before we move on to Docker and init?
Let's move on to Docker and init.
Or Learning Center. I don't know if you want to mention the Learning Center, but
yeah. So we won't spend a lot of time there, but we've been, as we again are trying to help folks onboard and learn. there's a new learning center that's part of Docker Desktop that has a couple of small, short little walkthroughs. Okay, what is a container? Click here to run the container, and it's like this interactive walkthrough. And again, we're just getting started there too. But yeah, stay tuned for more updates in that area.
That's awesome. The more folks that are getting involved and learning how to use these tools is the better, I think.
Yep.
All right. So Docker init. What is it and when do we use it? What's a good use case for Docker init?
Yeah. So Docker init is a new command that's basically used to help bootstrap a project. So if I've got a Python application or a Node app, there are several different languages it supports now. I can use Docker init and it'll kind of discover the languages that are in use there and create a Docker file, create a compose file, and then a separate README of just here's what we created for you and here's how to use it and whatnot, and just kind of help bootstrap and get you started. Now, it's not going to be the end-all solution. Like it doesn't set up your full dev environment and everything because there's so many different ways to do that. But it's used to help just kind of initialize and help bootstrap, get you at least a couple steps further down the road. And like even the Docker file, like when they first launched it, like I opened up a Docker file on a project. I'm like, okay, I'm actually picking up a couple of new things here as well too, because they're using like the latest. And okay, hey, I'm doing a run with a mount cache or a cache mount, and it's using a lot of the best practices, and it's all documentative and with comments of here's what's happening, here's why we're doing this, and whatnot too. So it's a great bootstrapping, great tool to help get you started.
This Docker init is like one of those things where it's like, why wasn't this around? So like we're 9-10 years into this. It's like, man, this should have been around for a while, but I'm glad it's there now.
Yeah, well, and taking off my Docker employee hat and putting the captain hat back on from the past. Like it's been interesting because over the years, Docker has kind of played with tools like this in the past. What was it? Man, what were the tools? I'm sure.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about because like there was private source enterprise tools, there was open source projects, but I think real quick, I think that we got lost along the way. It's a great question, Nirmal. I think we got lost along the way around migrating of legacy apps and creating a workflow around that, where even though this is technically that, because it requires that you have your software project first, right? You don't Docker init before your npm init or whatever. And so you have to have the project there, which technically makes it like a migrating kind of tool, because you're presumably having an app, even if it's just a demo app, that doesn't have a Docker file, doesn't have a Docker ignore, doesn't have a compose file. And I love that Docker init actually does all those things and not just a Docker file, because I think at first it was always about the Docker file. And now it feels like Docker init is, well, we're just going to give you all the standard three, I think it's three maybe, I think it's just three files actually, isn't it? Docker file, compose file, and Docker ignore. I think that is what it creates. And it's language specific. And I think a lot of the stuff before was either, well, this is a 101 generic Docker file that anyone in any project could use, or it was a very specific migration tool that would maybe go deeper into an analyzing of your project. Because, Michael, I don't actually know this. On the init, does it actually does it know how to build in dependencies and all that? Or is it just saying, oh, you have a node project, so I just add in npm CI? Like it's kind of generic like that, right? It doesn't really...
Yeah, I mean, so it does a little bit of language detection and, of course, prompts you and ask, okay, did we detect it right? But then from there, it is a little hard-coded. It'll ask you, okay, are you using npm or yarn? So it'll ask a couple of those kind of basic dependency things. But beyond that, there's not a lot of additional branching out or... customization that it will do itself. Of course, it'll create the stuff and then you can customize it however you want from there.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's not like static analyzing your toolkit to determine your dependencies or
But it is a kind of interesting thing because as we're looking at like Docker AI and that kind of stuff, which I know we'll talk more about the AI stuff later, it's kind of like how might that be able to plug in here to help you bootstrap a project more aligned with how you're already doing things or whatnot too. So and I see a couple of comments in chat about that as well too. And one question from Conrad here, I'll go ahead and pull up. How does one implement a template for Docker init for unsupported languages? So as of today, we don't have that yet, but it is something that we've done a lot of talking about internally of, how do you, I mean, just how you can npx create or yarn create or whatever, and use these templates from other community sources. What might a similar thing look like here as well too? So no answer there yet. Maybe
there
a
is
question for Mac at you. What other languages would you like to see there too?
Yeah, there's a feedback in when you run Docker init, you can select "Don't see something you need, let us know," and so that probably sends a message right to Michael or something like that.
yeah, he's definitely one of the only employees at Docker now. What do you have, over like 500 employees or something now? I'm trying to remember.
500 now. Yep.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's just amazing. I mean, 4 years ago you were at 70 something, and now 5. That's just so much.
Well, even when I joined almost 2 years ago, we were at just about 150. So even in almost 2 years, it's tripled. So.
That's crazy. Yeah,
it's hard. I mean, we could have a whole show about how do you even keep culture in a place like that where everybody's new, and how do you bring
That's a good idea for a show.
Hard topics.
It would be. Yep.
So going from that to Compose, right? So like, let's not ignore the fact that Compose got a lot of love this year too. So what are some new stuff in Compose?
Yeah, I wanted to pitch I've got a few shorts here on YouTube about Compose Watch. I think a lot of people, if you've been watching this channel, or watching my newsletter, reading my newsletter, whatever, you're probably aware of Watch, which is my favorite feature of Compose in the last years, like many years, other than Compose going to the Compose spec instead of versions. That was a fantastic move. So Watch is that thing that syncs. It essentially, I feel like it. I kept calling it Docker Compose Sync all this time, but watches your files, and I think in a lot of ways it removes the need for a bind mount, particularly on Mac. For those of us on Mac that struggle with the Mac to Linux barrier, who knew that Mac would be the place where it's actually the least Linux-like OS of the 3 major OSs for a desktop? Crazy world we live in. But Michael, we didn't get as much about. So there's actually 2 other things. I'm realizing now. We have Compose Include.
Yep.
And then we have Compose Publish. And I didn't put Compose Publish wasn't in the list either. See, we're already forgetting things. What's the elevator pitch on Include?
So Include, the way I like to say it is, it allows your Compose apps to be composable, which to some people are like, okay, that didn't explain anything to me. I can't define it by using the term. But anyway, it allows you to break up your Compose files into smaller Compose files. And so actually some of the use cases that we've started to see around that might be larger teams, larger companies that might start to have a shared services library type thing, where they could say, all right, here's a repo, for example, that has a bunch of shared services and Compose files and config files and everything that's needed to support a lot of the application development. And so now I can just say, okay, cool, I'm doing a LAMP stack application, whatever, and I'm going to pull in MySQL and PHP MyAdmin or whatever else, and I'm just going to pull from that shared services library. And then my Compose file has just the PHP application and the bind mounts and the things that my app needs, but then all those other services I'm including from somewhere else, just as an example. And you can think of similar things for, okay, I need to run Kafka. Well, running Kafka is not as easy as just running Kafka. You got to run Zookeeper and all the config and everything else that comes along with it. So, okay, cool. Let me just define a Compose file for that, share that amongst my teams, and then I could just include that. And so again, starting to see some interesting use cases there. There's I think you still have to use an environment variable flag right now, but there's a way to do a Compose Include that references a Git repo where it'll actually clone that repo and then use it from there. So it doesn't have to be a local file or something on the file system as well too. So again, some interesting use cases that opens up. But.
Yeah, that's very neat.
Yeah. Nanner has a question on profile versus include. To me, I love profile. It's one of those underrated features that is relatively new, like 3 or 4 years old. Not a lot of people know about it, but profile to me is when I want to break down my big solution in a single Compose file into smaller chunks and run them and control them independently. I see profiles with the teams I work with often used for, they set a specific profile for things that are maybe like the first time database seeding, or special things that are maybe not just running contain web services, something that I need to run as a one-off. And they will use those as profiles, as a separate profile for, or maybe if you have a team where you have back end and front end and it's all in the same compose file, and your back end people don't always need to run the front end, so you can put profiles for that. Include to me is how to break up a large compose file into smaller chunks for reusability across repos. Is that like a good argument?
I would say include is more of, if you think about what are all the different source materials you're going to bring together to put into your stack, and then profile is, okay, what am I selectively actually turning on and off? Would be kind of the way to think about that. And I'd say another use case I see profiles a lot, because I was guilty of this in years past, where I would have a compose file for development. I have a compose file for my tests that are running the end-to-end tests, and another compose file for maybe production or whatever. And profiles lets you kind of merge all that into a single, and it makes it easier to leverage the same services for different use cases. And then you can use the profiles to then just selectively say, hey, I'm doing my end-to-end test, so let me enable the test profile, which then will then spin up those services, but not the other services.
Yeah. If you go into microservices, I feel like the profile is really a powerful feature, because you don't want to light up all 20. So you just want to spin up 5, and you always need a database, an API or something or whatever. So those are always in every profile or whatever. So that I feel like you nailed it there. Like the problem, if you have the problem of a compose file in the back-end repo and a compose file in the front-end repo and a compose file in every, if you're breaking out all your repos, if you're compose filing in every one of those, that to me is where you should use profile. If you're repeating the same information in a bunch of different compose files across different repos or directories, and you're just copy and pasting the same info, that to me feels more like an include would solve that problem. Yeah. This funny thing is all these things can be used together. And so I feel like I need a new compose course, because I definitely teach a lot of compose in my courses, but there's so much to it now that you could become like a compose expert.
Compose class. So a lot of new stuff in compose. What the last one is, compose publish, that we have listed.
Oops.
Real quick, what is compose publish?
All right, Brett, you want that one or me?
Okay. One sentence. I get one sentence. It lets me share my compose files with other people without needing Git.
Correct.
There we go. Awesome.
Yep. And I'll say too, we're just at the start of that. I mean, because right now there's published. There's not a lot of ways to consume those published things yet, and so we're still just getting started in that space. But yeah, it's using OCR artifacts under the hood and that kind of stuff. So it's for those of you that may have been around a long time, it kind of feels like almost a throwback to Docker app, but in a different way. So it looks a little bit different, but stay tuned.
Awesome.
There. Yeah, because that's like an alpha feature, right? Like publishes like alpha. Yeah. Okay. So that's exciting.
The big highlight from DockerCon this past year was this little thing called Docker Scout. What is it? Let's get into it. Why was it the centerpiece of DockerCon this year?
Yeah. So first off, the really exciting thing from a company perspective is for the most part, Docker has just sold licenses to Docker Desktop, and so kind of as a just company growth perspective, it's like, oh well, hey, this is exciting because hey, it's another product. It's something else that we're building and we're selling and all that kind of stuff too. So it's kind of all right, we've hit a maturity point of hey, now we've got multiple products that we're supporting and everything, which is exciting to be at again. But again, what Scout is really focused on is helping build a secure software supply chain. When you build container images, there's a lot that goes into that. Okay, what bases are you using? Where are they coming from? Are they trusted? Have they been verified, et cetera? what are you putting in your image? What open source licenses are you using? What vulnerabilities might be associated with them? What code quality metrics are you, is your code, are they meeting your code quality standards, et cetera? And there's lots of different ones. Have you configured your image to run as a non-root user, for example? So there's just a lot of these kind of like base things that go into your image builds and building a secure software supply chain. And beforehand, there weren't, Docker didn't have any tools to help out with this. So Scout was, again, really focused on that. And so as you see, Bret's kind of going through the product pages here and pulling up scout.docker.com here. There's local developer tools that help me as a developer to know, even at this screen, we're seeing various policies up at the top, and copyleft license issues or vulnerabilities, outdated base images, et cetera. And so while I can see that here across my entire organization in this UI, as a developer, well, I can evaluate all these things locally. And so I don't have to wait for the feedback loop of it having to go through my CI pipelines and then just to find out, oh, wait, I can't run this in production because I don't have a non-root user, et cetera. I can evaluate all this stuff locally. And the theory here is to speed up developers and decrease that feedback loop, help them stay efficient and kind of in the groove longer. And so, yeah, it's our new product. It went GA, so generally available at DockerCon in October. There's still a lot of work to do here. There's still a lot of new features and things that we have planned. There's a GitHub app that's being released here very, very soon. So we'll actually integrate and can actually even automate PRs to update Docker files to use new base images or fix vulnerabilities, that kind of stuff. So that's pretty exciting stuff there. Again, just it's about that secure software supply chain.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
And in combination with one of the themes, and we talked about this during the DockerCon live show, one of the themes was this focus on the inner loop, right? The stuff that's happening before the pull request within your software development lifecycle. And this fits squarely within the intersection of secure software supply chain, security, and that inner loop development cycle. And it's excited. I'm excited to see more emphasis put on that step in the process, because I think, as we've been seeing over the last decade, from an operator point of view, there's been a lot of focus on like Kubernetes, running containers, the environment and context, and everything that you have to do to productionize and keep your services up and running from an operations perspective. And then there's a massive gap, and then there's like development tools like somewhere like out there, and this gap is starting to be closed finally, I think, as an industry. And so this is kind of in between there and a step toward that. Correct?
I very much agree. And that's been kind of the fun thing of building these tools, that it's an intersection of so many different personas and so many different roles coming together. As Docker's really focused on developer tooling and everything, it's like, how do we make this kind of, a lot of the tools that are very oriented towards security professionals or very niche personas, how do we make them accessible to everybody here? And so, it's been fun to see the developers' reaction so far as they've played around with it and been like, okay, hey, I can actually use this. This seems pretty straightforward. And, a lot of times developers don't care about, especially like the security vulnerability stuff, until they're forced to care about it. And so this makes it a lot easier for them to do that. But again, there's it's been kind of interesting to see, even for myself, as we've enabled some policies to try out internally, like the images configured with a non-root user by default. Okay. Like, I'll admit, how often have I cared about that in the past? Like, it's like, okay, it's one of those things, it's a best practice. Yeah, I should do it. But once it's a policy, once it's up there and I'm being measured by it, like, I want that to be 100%. And so I'm going to go update all my images. Like, it's almost this like gamifying that occurs with it. And so again, as we've been testing out a lot of these new policies internally, which, I see that one's not on your personal org here yet. But, as we've been trying these things out, like, I've noticed my own just security consciousness has increased. I wouldn't say I'm a security expert by any means, but I'm at least thinking about these things more than what I used to be.
Yeah, you have a lot here, and I'm trying to figure out like where does this fit in the marketplace for like the teams that I'm working with, the people that are asking me about security, because DevSecOps. I mean, it's getting to the point where Nirmal and I every show we have someone's asking about DevSecOps. That doesn't mean that you in chat can just start spamming us DevSecOps, but you could. But that's not this show. But we have companies like Sneak and these companies that focus on developer tool security. That's not container specific. It's usually code repo oriented. And then you have all these security tools that are cluster operator focused, where it's monitoring infrastructure and Kubernetes clusters and what's running, and those are really great. And then there's this nebulous middle area where some tools are just a part of the CI pull request, or where the CI runs or something like that, and that's really their focus. But I feel like this, for a sort of like a 1.0 release, let's call it, it's got CLI tooling locally, it's got GitHub Action and CI tooling for automation, it's got tooling in your registry or to plug into all the other registries, it's got tooling in Docker Desktop, and it all comes together. I think that's really what I enjoy about it, is that every developer works differently. Some use CLI only, some lean on GUI, some don't like remote services, some completely depend on remote services. So there's a lot of places where I feel like even if I were to go and set up a GitHub Actions to do a Trivy scan or some, a Sneak scan or something like that, sure, I'm putting a gate there maybe in my CI, but that's pretty late, right? That's in the PR process. That is maybe later than what the developer is just trying to get code submitted so they can get it in the cluster, and now that's when they're finding out the bad news. So I love the cohesiveness of this around it. It exists in my Docker Desktop. I don't have to wait until it's processed by my Git repo. I can push my own images to Hub and see the stats here without pushing them maybe to the official repos of my project. I can kind of figure out where I like to see this stuff, and I like the different options, because you could have easily just said we have scout.docker.com and that's it, right? Like that's all you get. But I feel like we're gonna have to have another show once a lot of these integrations light up, because each one of these integrations is an entire show for us to talk about how Scout can help you with your Artifactory, or Scout can help you with your Circle CI. There's just so much here.
One of the things I'm going to read between the lines a little bit of what you said there as well too, but Scout is really drilling in on the idea that, or containers and images as the packaging artifact there. And so, everything is, okay, what's the base image? What's going in your image? How are we deploying your images? And so, as you said, this Scout's not a production runtime monitoring service. Like we're not going to replace that, and we have no plans to replace that. It's how can we hook in with those different services and whatnot, and that's some of the Sysdig integrations you see and whatnot. So it's really about the secure software supply chain around the container images, and actually kind of tying back earlier, the Moby releases and using build kit, and okay, now we can generate these SBOMs by automatically. Well, hey, that's what enables a lot of this to actually happen. When you create an image, that image is immutable. You're not going to change that. And so you think of that SBOM as almost like the cargo manifest of what's in the box. And then Scout can ingest that and continue to watch and monitor for new issues or things, even after your CI gates have passed and you said, yeah, all things are good. Well, new vulnerabilities, new issues may be discovered 3 months from now. Well, yeah, you can just go in the dashboard and it'll cross-list vulnerabilities X against the SBOMs that we've ingested, and here are the images that are affected by it. So yeah, there's no more having to go rescan everything to find out what's vulnerable, what's not. It just will tell you. And so it's kind of this, the way I like to think of it, it's just this like huge data graph at the end of the day, with lots of different things that are annotating your images with packages and what user it's running as, and open source licenses and all these different things. And then how do you make sense of that graph? So
yeah, I like the changing default behavior subtly is a hard art form in tooling, and I feel like Scout can do that, where like we're getting attestations in some cases automatically, as SBOM generation is happening automatically, and so as Docker sort of pushes these things to our different tooling, and then people will stumble onto it and go, oh, I don't know what SBOMs are, because they're not maybe at a large company that has to deal with SBOMs or government contractors or whatever. So I like, that's one of the things that when we go back, and someone in chat said something about Swarm earlier. I see you people. I see you Swarm people. So I feel like that's some of the ways that we have to get this stuff out. That's almost like our duty of care kind of thing. Of if we know there's a better default or a feature that we should enable that doesn't harm anyone, like an SBOM scan or like adding attestations in build kit, like that should just happen, and then people later go, oh, look at all this stuff I have in my image that I didn't even know about. That's here now. Whereas I think a lot of times in the industry, we release a tool and we say, well, everybody should use this tool, but you have to implement that tool, and people don't always do that. And if it's a single use tool, like an attestation creator, and like very few people will do that, right? It's only when they're mandated to do it. And I love this sort of turning security on by default approach. All right, I'm going to cut the Docker Scout conversation.
One last thing.
One last.
Yeah, where we're hoping to I mean, the conversations have already started, but like open pub key and signing of those images and everything, like those that have been involved with it, like there's a lot of infrastructure, there's a lot of process, there's a lot of setup involved. And again, it's how do we just make that easy? So as you were saying, it could be as mostly just turnkey, or it's automatic and it's just there and you don't have to think about it or worry about it. And if something breaks, if something's hey, this image you pulled has been tampered with, then you can know it right away and you don't have to think much about it. So it's how do we unlock a lot of these capabilities for the masses? Stay tuned there.
And if you're working at a large enterprise company and you haven't heard about SBOMs yet, it is likely going to land up in front of you
right
in the near future. Especially, I mean, in the public sector for sure, but anywhere that you're working in any kind of compliance environment, it's likely going to start showing up more and more in your world.
Yeah. Barracuda asks real quick, is it possible to have a Scout layer to CI and CD? Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, it's one of the integrations. And yeah, we should definitely do a whole show and dive deep into there, because there's a lot to go through. And
let's do it.
Natter's asking us as well, I don't know if I clicked on this one, about requesting a new show. Yes. About all the different stages where we can do Scout stuff, like local dev, when I push the images, when I do CI, there's all these different layers to that for sure. All right, awesome, and this is a great discussion. We should do this more often.
I love how you have the notes up so everyone can see how we run this show. So this is how we do it. By the way,
exactly.
So fancy.
I wonder what's coming up next, everyone.
Exactly.
So jumping to a completely different topic, like we did one theme for sure, which is like that inner loop, the dev cycle, the pre-PR, secure software supply chains, if I can say that 10 times fast. That was definitely a big theme of last year across the different conferences, around DevOps for sure. The other big theme we'd be amiss to mention, and I don't think we're allowed to do a YouTube live show anymore, Brett, without mentioning AI or machine learning anymore, is AI ML, right? And so with the explosion of Gen AI, LLMs, machine learning, it's been there for a while, and now just kind of coming into mainstream usage this past year. What are some of the areas that Docker is intersecting with machine learning and AI?
Yeah, great question. So I think there's a couple different things, and probably the first thing I'll mention was actually what you just had on the screen there, Brett, was the Gen AI stack. So at DockerCon in October, we announced a partnership with LangChain and Olama and Neo4j for the stack. And I wanted to go ahead and say up front, like, this isn't the end all be all stack. It's mostly hey, here's an inspiration to get you started to play with it, because there's a lot to learn in AI in this space between LLMs and chains and RAG, so retrieval augmented generation. Like there's so much to it. And so with the stack, it was kind of, here's a starting point. If you want to experiment, you want to play with it. And guess what? You get clone Docker Compose up and it's all running locally on your machine. Yeah. And so you can develop, you can test things out locally, try it out. And again, just kind of kick the tires a little bit and get a feel for how's this going to work. Now, And there's several different applications. There's a chat bot. There's a PDF reader where you can give it a PDF and it'll analyze. You can ask it questions and whatnot. So there's a couple different applications you can try out there. And so in many ways, this is helping show that, Docker, the way that you've been using Docker to build your web apps and your other applications and whatnot, well, guess what? All that still works in the AI space. It's just what you're putting in the container image is different. Yep. But all the packaging, all the tooling, the compose stuff, like everything else, you can still leverage. It's just now a different type of app. And so that's a lot of what this Gen AI stack is here.
So it's like a getting started with respect to Gen AI locally, which is nice, because I think a lot of folks get kind of confused about, hey, is it just using the APIs that are from the major model vendors or LLM vendors out there, or is it like, how do I interact with these models?
Sure.
Can I run them locally? And the answer to all that is yes, right? It's like it's all new. It's an all new space. Everyone's experimenting in this. They're trying out all kinds of permutations, and this is kind of getting started with some of the tooling that folks can use to develop Gen AI or just machine learning model from model to model interaction, fine tuning models, etc. And it's just dipping the toe, like you said, Michael. It's not the be all and all stack for sure. And that the ML space, and I know Bret and I, we've talked about doing more shows around this topic in the future. Please let us know in the comments and chat if that's a topic that you all want to hear more about. But there's ML ops, right? How do you train models? How do you do serving inference of models? Then there's these tools like the Gen AI stack, which is using models, fine tuning them, running them locally, running use cases against them, etc. And one of the core elements to all the things that are happening in the ML world is that containers are a core component of how people are doing these things, right? So like ChatGPT or the GPT-4 models were, they did their training, OpenAI did their training on Kubernetes, on like a massive Kubernetes cluster. Containers are involved there, right? So it doesn't mean that you have to learn like another thing. If you're already used to the Docker world or the container world, that means that machine learning is it's more accessible to you. So that's awesome.
and what I like about it too is, again, the whole point of using containers in development is, again, if once you've got it set up, you don't have to think about the environment. You can just jump in and focus on the code and what is it that I'm building, rather than how do I install Python? How do I get all these, OpenAI tools or, LangChain, all these different things. Like, you don't have to think about that. So the ability to go from nothing to iterating and testing and experimenting, it's so much easier. So that's kind of what the Gen AI stack was intended to do. And it's been neat to see all the different conversations and blog posts like this one as well. How they've helped support that.
Yeah, awesome. Jade's got a great walkthrough. I think this is really good. This is the one that helped me after DockerCon actually understand what all this stuff that was going on. And we should point out real quick, because this is something that I also got confused with at DockerCon. The Gen AI stack and what we're talking about when we talk about Docker AI, tell me if I'm wrong here. To me, the Docker AI is a sort of a program or a suite of different things that are all AI related. Gen AI stack is one of them. And then we actually have an Docker AI early access program, which was demoed at DockerCon. And that's actually inside, I think that's in VS Code, right? Like
So I think someone mentioned in the chat, wouldn't it be cool if there was something that could assist with making a Docker, like when we were talking about Docker Init earlier? Would it be cool if there was something that assists with creating the Docker file or creating a compose file? And so that's what some of that was demoed at DockerCon, and that is what is being called, I guess, Docker AI, is this kind of assistant. You want to go a little bit more into that?
Yeah. So final name still TBD there, but yeah. So this Docker AI Yeah, it was announced at DockerCon. As of today, is a VS Code extension as we're just iterating and experimenting. But yeah, is this opportunity to have a chatbot experience with a model that's trained specifically around Docker and everything around it. And it uses the context of the project that you're in to help answer those questions. So for example, and I was actually going to try to pull up a demo here, but didn't get time to finish setting it up. But anyways, I can ask the bot and just say, hey, I'm new to Docker. I ran this Docker Compose Up thing. How do I open the voting service? And it understands, okay, hey, you're asking about a service that's in the compose file. Let me look at the exposed ports. So what's the host container? What's the container, or what's the host port and the container port? Like, it understands all those things, and then just says, yeah, hey, open up localhost 5000 and here's your app, kind of thing. And so it'll, and then it will explain it to you along the way. So it can do a lot of that kind of stuff, or just general questions, but also, yeah, how can I help Bootstrap, or I want to add another service to my compose stack. Help me do that. So yeah, trying to be a little bit of an assistant, help you build your apps.
I was trying to find the.
There's a link to the timestamp. I have it.
Is it?
I have it.
Oh, okay.
I'll post
Perfect.
it on there.
Yeah.
Awesome. So this was demoed. There was a demo of this at DockerCon back in October. So we'll post the video here. There we go. All right. So we have we're close to the end of the show. We've gone through a full hour, so we've covered a lot of the things that were announced and delivered upon, I guess you could say, released in 2023. So 2024, what's coming up? What are some areas of what are you excited about for 2024 personally, and then what are some areas that we should be on the lookout for that we might do another show on in 2024?
Yeah. So great question. First off, I'm excited because there's so much going on. So the first things that I'll mention are just a little bit of updates from some of the things that we announced at DockerCon. So at DockerCon, we talked about this next gen cloud builder, Docker Builder. I forget the exact name, but that's now called Docker Build Cloud. And this service will be coming out in the next couple of weeks, and will basically allow you to leverage remote builders. And so again, tying back to the build kit being the default builder and everything, that again helps sets up these types of things. So then your team can use a shared build environment. And if I do a build, it may be the first build, it's going to populate the cache and everything. But now if any of my teammates do that same build, well, they can leverage the cache that I just populated. And we'll have native multi-architecture nodes and all that kind of stuff. So really cool stuff. And it can also be shared with my CI pipeline. So again, you kind of think of this shared cache environment and a lot of the benefits that come along with that. And especially since like I'm on a Mac with Apple Silicon, if I'm having to build for AMD 64 images, that could be a slow process. And so again, this gives me an opportunity to use native machines for all that as well. So stay tuned on that. And again, as Docker is looking forward, we are thinking about how we can leverage cloud services to enhance and add more compute resources to the things that you're already doing, but do so in a way that still, developers love to build locally. And so the last thing we want to do is say, hey, you must do everything in the cloud and forget your normal practices. Yeah. You're going to
wait for CI. Wait for CI.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And so like we want to be smart about that. So as we continue to look forward, like this build service is one of those where, hey, I still use Compose locally. I'm still using all my normal local tools, but I'm just enhancing that with a remote build service, but the images still get pulled down on my machine. I'm still running the containers on my machine, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So it's again, being very thoughtful. And like we were talking about earlier, how do we make that as seamless and as easy as possible so you don't even have to think about it? It just works. So again, there's more in the works I can't talk about yet, but continue to expand on that idea and that mindset as well.
So it's one of those things where I was going to say real quick, it's one of those things where like the int earlier, it's like, I felt like we could have had this 8 years ago. Not that Docker should, it's one of those things where once you used it, you're like, yes, I always want this option. I would love to have an option that if I'm on a low powered machine, or if I need to do cross cross compilation, different architectures, or there's all it's more. At first, when I first saw it, I thought, oh, it's just a remote Docker engine that is basically automated the connection, but it's way more than that. So when we get an official release of it, we're gonna have to have another Docker show. There's still a reason why Docker is in the name of this YouTube channel. It's because Docker keeps doing stuff. So we talk a lot about it. All right. So
to that point, like around that local development or the development lifecycle, that inner loop, one area that another thing of like, why haven't we had this a long time ago, is the Docker debug. I was excited about that at DockerCon. I liked the demo of that. So what is Docker debug? Just real quick.
Yeah, and maybe if I get the screen share up here, I'll share real quick. So as of today, it's actually packaged as an extension, but eventually it'll be rolled in. This just helps us iterate a little bit faster. But so when you install the extension, and there's a separate one for Kubernetes as well too. But when you do this, it'll basically create another command that will allow me to, if I jump to my terminal. So for example, when I do a normal, let's just jump into vote. Let's just start a shell here. If I try to ping, ping's not found. Okay. Yep. And we've all run into that before. Hey, I'm trying to debug something and crap, I can't do it. Well, now what it'll allow me to do is say, hey, I'm going to attach to this container, but I'm going to bring my own tools into the container. And so I'm not going to install anything. And in fact, my container can stay read-only and everything else. But now, hey, I can do my ping and it's working because it's using the tools that I'm bringing along with it rather than the tools that are installed in the container. And I can install other stuff. It's using Nix behind the scenes. So
it's magic. That feels like magic. Yeah.
It is really cool. And so a similar thing for Kubernetes pods. In that case, it'll actually spin up an ephemeral container in the pod. But same idea here, where now I can debug and I can troubleshoot, bringing in my own tools, which allows you to then say, hey, my final images I'm building and pushing to production or in development, like I don't have to build a lot of those debug tools in because now I have a way to bring them in, which means, hey, smaller images, more streamlined, less security issues, footprint, et cetera. And this will even work with multi-stage Go projects in which I do from scratch and just copy in binaries. Now I can actually get into a shell and look at the file system, debug even from scratch images, which is really cool.
That's nice, especially when you don't have to have like a different dev image from your production because you need all these particular like ping, curl. I have that set of tools. In fact, I have the net. I stole the NetShoot from Nicola, a very popular image of all these Kubernetes and Docker troubleshooting tools that are really just Linux tools mostly. And it's like, that is its own course. Like it's an old section. It's its own section in my course of how to use Docker exec and kube control. All these different commands and different options that I have to do, and then I have to know the package managers in there to make sure I get the tools. It's a lot. I mean, it actually for someone who's maybe even not super familiar with all the different package managers and stuff, it can be a lot. And I think this is one of those things where, again, it feels like it's one of those things that should have always been there all along in our container pipelines, and now we have it. It's right there. It's free in your Docker desktop.
So feel free to download, try it out. It's just, right now it's an extension to get them. Again, eventually it'll be actually folded into the product itself. But so there's the debug tools to get local containers, which is what I just demoed, and the ephemeral containers because it's a different use case, and they're wanting to iterate and kind of deploy it more frequently and that kind of stuff. Is a separate Kubernetes toolkit one as well. So give it a shot, give us feedback, and
so debug you can get now as an extension, may change later. The Docker build cloud that we talked about is wait until January, come back to this show. We'll point it out when it's announced, but we're all on our, we're basically on the edge of our seats waiting for that launch essentially, or the announcement of that. And then I know we're quickly running out of time. By the way, I want to point out, Natter, thank you so much. Super chat.
Thank you.
We love the super chats. And he says, thanks for another great year of informative discussions. Happy holidays and see you in the new year. Here's a couple of chocolates on me. Hot chocolates. Oh. I just had a hot chocolate the other day. Woo! So
thank you.
It's the time of year for hot chocolate. And then quickly, we had the Mutagen acquisition. We had the Atomic Jars acquisition. Like these are both tools and experts in their fields that are going to be showing up as different parts of the Docker tooling. I don't know if you have any sort of 2024 insider. I mean, that you can talk about that we can sneak out there on this show that maybe no one will notice because no one watches this show, so maybe they won't realize that we did something.
What is this preview feature? Synchronized file shares. What is this? So the Mutagen, for those that aren't familiar, it brought in a lot of different things, but Jacob Howard, he is actually a Docker captain as well before the acquisition, but had built a tool to help kind of synchronize files from the host file system into the containerized, the virtual machine. So that way it's not having to go through the bind mounts. And so with the Mutagen acquisition, well, hey, now let's actually fold that into Docker Desktop itself. And so this will be coming out here very soon, where then you can set up the synchronized file shares. And then, so it's trading basically additional storage for performance. And so, yeah, the files are going to be on your host machine, but then also copied in the container. And then this will do all the synchronization between the different hosts, all the machines and all that kind of stuff, and just make it work. So that's coming soon too. And then of course I'm excited with the Atomic Jar acquisition as well, because in many ways, Docker's been build, share, run, and the Scout we kind of talked about verify, but now it's like, hey, let's add another verb to that of test. How do we make testing easier? And I've been a big test containers fan for a long time and whatnot. So it's fun to have them part of the group now.
Yeah, Test Containers actually was on this show, I think this year. One of the other co-founders, and it started with Java, my understanding, but now has a lot more framework and language supports built into it. And I need a refresher because I watched the video. You know how you have someone on the show, they teach you all this stuff, and then 6 months later you've completely forgotten it all. That's what happened with me and Test Containers. So we're gonna have to do another show on that in the new year.
I think that's our common phrase. That's another show. So
that's what we're going to talk about. That's the title of this show is. This is the show about other shows. The meta show. Very cool.
Yeah. Well, we've squandered another hour and a half or hour and 15 going through. Not squandered. Sorry. We've done an awesome hour and 15 filled. Yes. And one last thing I wanted to do before we kind of close out is just thank you, the audience, all our viewers, our listeners. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for looking at the newsletter. Thanks for opening up the blog posts. Sorry for having to listen to my voice in your car or on your podcast. But thanks. We wouldn't do this without y'all. And I'm super excited about getting into these awesome topics next year with Bret, if Bret will have me back next year.
And Nirmal, for what it's worth, I mean, for what it's worth, your voice
is better than this voice.
There we go. Can't wait to hear that on the podcast.
So now you have to sing the Christmas chipmunk song because you have that. And Christmas time. Christmas. All right. The last thing we should say is the community is growing. So Docker community is growing. Of course, I see that through my courses and how people still keep buying courses. But there's also we had our first DockerCon this year back in the real world live. Stay tuned for Docker to announce something about next year. I don't really have a lot of inside information, but I have had conversations. So there will be something in the future. We have 20 new captains, which means you have more captains making YouTube videos than ever before and blogging than ever before. I think we're up to 63 now, it says here, which that's like peak captains. I feel like that's very close to even pre-COVID peak captains when we were all at all the conferences spreading the word of Docker. Yeah, so very cool. And like I said, I'm basically going to repeat, Nirmal, thank you so much, y'all, for being here. Michael, thank you so much. Of course, you will be back next year, as always. And Nirmal will be, he gets a stamp of approval for another year of co-hosting.
Yay!
Yes! Congratulations.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We're going to wrap this up for a great show with great guests. I'll be back on Thursdays in the new year. Come and join us live or listen to us on your podcast player. See you soon, everyone.
Right.
Ciao.
Thanks all.
Happy New Year. Thanks.
Happy New Year.